Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host, David Holloway, and it's great as always to be here with you. And once again, it's brilliant to have Mr. Paul Bindig with me. How are you, Paul?
I'm feeling wonderful, thank you.
Good. Now, this one's a bit of an exciting one for you personally. We'll talk about that after the show. But our guest this episode is Mr. Roddy Bottum. Now, Roddy would be best known to most listeners as the keyboard player in the phenomenally successful hard rock outfit Faith No More. But as we'll learn, Roddy's a musician with a prolific and diverse output. So it includes everything from, the indie pop sensibilities of Imperial Teen, which I personally just love, the dancey electronica of Crickets, and the doomy metal of Nastie Band. And they're just all his current projects. Add to that his current COVID isolation-inspired collaboration with his partner Joey and his film score and opera work. It's fair to say Roddy's not only an excellent keyboard player, but a truly creative artist with plenty to share. So let's jump in and have a listen. Roddy, can't thank you enough again for joining us. And a Saturday night, it takes true dedication to give up part of your Saturday night to talk to some Aussies.
David and Paul, thank you for having me. I was flattered when you reached out. I'm happy to be here. Thanks. There's nothing I'd rather be doing on a Saturday than hanging out with you guys.
I appreciate it. And so we've been asking most of our guests over the last few months how they're keeping busy during these challenging times. And knowing how many projects you're involved with, I can't imagine you are struggling to keep busy. But yeah, tell us what you've been up to in this year of lockdown.
Yeah, it's a crazy challenge. When the whole pandemic started coming down, I was in New York, and we had planned Faith No More shows. In Australia, we were starting our Faith No More shows, and then we were going to do Europe, and then we were going to tour America with the band Korn. Our whole next 4 months were all mapped out. And when the COVID hit, it became clear pretty quick that was sort of off the table. That wasn't going to happen. So that took a little bit of re-strategizing. My boyfriend and I, we were in New York at the time, and there wasn't even any COVID here yet, but we were just sort of clocking what was going on in Italy, when it first started in early March. And just judging based on that, it was became really clear really fast, what was going to go down. And I live in New York, and it's we're all on top of each other here.
Yeah.
So it's honestly it's a city. It's a nightmare for the pandemic. So seeing it coming was kind of horrifying. And even before there were many cases here, my boyfriend and I kind of freaked out. People kept talking about in terms of what they were going to do in case of emergency. And people kept talking about in terms of what are you going to do? What's your emergency plan? What's your exit plan? People would ask questions like that, all my friends. And it became super scary. And we were what is our exit strategy? I live in New York. We don't have a car. I don't have a car here. It was what are we going to do? So coincidentally, at the same time, my mom started getting really sick. And so just kind of on a whim, we rented a car. And for maybe a week in advance. And we said, well, if we get to that point, let's just have that option. So we got to that day on the car rental day and just decided you know what? It just started feeling really crazy. So we just got in the car and we drove to California.
Wow.
Which was a really crazy drive. But on the way out, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, that's a hell of a drive.
It's a really long drive. It takes if you drive straight, it takes 4 days. But it's we couldn't really fly, and we were just trying to be super, super safe. So we got in the car and we just started driving to California. And we were going to take care of my mom, who was really sick. And she, in order to take care of her, we had to quarantine for a couple weeks before. So on our way out there driving, Joey, my boyfriend, is a musician. And this came up, what are we going to do creatively in this time to deal with what's coming up. I mean, we could see the writing on the wall. We were going to have to, be quarantined and alone and away from people for, probably months. So on the way out to California, Joey brought his guitar, and we went to this weird town that my mom has a house like in Oxnard, California, which is up maybe 50 miles north of Los Angeles. So we went there to quarantine. But on the drive, we sort of started talking about a project to do that would keep us busy and keep us creative through the quarantine. So Joey had his guitar with him. We had a piano at the house that we were going to quarantine in. And on the way out there, we just started kind of researching microphones and a good recording software to use. And so by the time we got to where we were going to quarantine, we had that stuff delivered. And we had a microphone, the stand-up piano that I had growing up with was at this house, Joey's guitar, and a computer. So we sort of set up a plan just to start a project, just to record some songs. We thought we'd record a handful of songs. And we've been going out for a year, and we don't really, we'd never made music together, so it was a bit of a gamble. But we just kind of set up shop, and with nothing else to do, we kind of just started writing songs. And we wrote pretty much over the course of time, we wrote an album's worth of songs, which is 11 songs, which today actually we just finished. They're all mixed and mastered. And then in the place that we were staying to, it's kind of near the beach and California is really pretty. It's a lot like Australia, but we made a couple of videos with our iPhone just by ourselves. We recorded all our songs and our parts by ourselves, and we just that's what we did. We set to tasks to sort of staying creative and being kind of productive.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And that was a huge help. That was great for a while.
And we are definitely going to talk about that project a little bit later on as well, so I do want to come back to that.
Sure.
But let's then start out with a bit of a potted history of Roddy Bottum. So let's talk about your earlier years, childhood, what got you into music, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles, and my mom is a really great piano player, and she sort of encouraged me to start taking piano lessons, which I did at 5 years old. I started playing piano, and I played that classical piano till I was probably about 17 or 18, and I moved to San Francisco, and it was a way different vibe. I moved up there for college and started Faith No More with my kind of childhood friend Billy, who plays bass in the band. We started the band up there in San Francisco. I bought a keyboard. I bought an old Oberheim keyboard, and we just started writing songs and started the band up there. And just over the course of time became what it became, I guess.
Yeah. It's, that's a very good plotted history. And when you first learnt the piano, it was something you took to immediately, or it took a bit of growing to love?
I always kind of loved it. I had 3 sisters, and I always tell people this when their kids are starting to play instruments. The 3 sisters, all of them took piano lessons too, but it didn't stick with any of them. But with me, I was really into it. I really got into it. I practiced and practiced and practiced. I loved it. So my ratio is maybe 1 in 4 kids will sort of, gravitate towards that given the opportunity. It feels like it's just something that's sort of in my blood and something it's really honestly the only thing I can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not a bad thing to be doing. Talking about Faith No More, it's obviously a band that's got a very eclectic and innovative mix of styles, and that proved to be quite unique and very popular worldwide. In the band's canon and list of songs, where would the listener most hear your musical sensibilities and influences?
When we started, it was we kind of came from a super post-punk, punk rock sort of vibe, and we were all very into heavy rhythms and a big, heavy kind of bombastic sound. And if you would have that sound, kind of the sound that we made without keyboards, I think it would verge on something that's really dark. Not metal so much, but it would be a different thing. I think it was my place in the band to sort of, keyboards, you guys know this, keyboards as keyboard players, we sort of add, I'm going out on a limb here, but it feels like the keyboards add sort of a feminine sense to a plethora or some sort of like project. Like
Agree.
without keyboards in Faith No More, it's a really sort of macho, tough, like heavy hitting musical experience. But if you add like adding keyboards onto that sort of opens up the scope and makes it kind of a more beautiful thing, a more soundscapey thing. Or I just like to say, like there's a more female quality to the music that there wouldn't be otherwise. And at the time too, like there weren't a lot of bands in our scene that were making that kind of music that had keyboards. So I think it did enable us to sort of stick out a little bit. It was really different.
Yeah, I think so, and my opinion is that's one of the reasons Faith No More was so popular. It sounded a little bit different to a lot of your contemporaries at the time.
Yeah.
When we're listening to a lot of that stuff, we can hear the big pads, the synth and string pads that you're laying down, which create a wonderful canvas for the rest of the music. But there's also lots of examples of, you talked about your classical playing growing up, and you can hear a lot of arpeggios being played and solo lines that are really quite beautiful, and they add significantly to the style and texture of the songs. I'm curious, Roddy, in the songwriting process, was it easy for you to find places to incorporate those sort of ideas?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was an easy thing to add to, because, like I said, I mean, without it, it's a whole different ball game or a whole different sound experience. But it was easy to add something to because it's sort of like, I mean, it was kind of an ego boost. Like just by playing keyboards, it changed everything. So it was sort of like, it felt really good to be able to sort of like be able to change the sound in that way. And I don't know for you guys, but for me, like pads are such an easy thing to add. Like in any recording project I've been involved in, like to add like just a pad is such a substantial sort of like addition to a sound. I heard someone talk about it at one point, like it's glue. And it does. It just sort of like, it's really easy to just put down a chord or a pad that sort of just like adds a cohesive quality to the music. And it really just kind of like, I mean, we're keyboard players, so we can say this, but it sounds a lot better.
Yes.
Couldn't agree more.
And so, I mean, while we're talking pads and string lines, Roddy, what was your go-to gear in those early years with Faith No More? And, what have you stuck with and what have you changed? What's your go-to gear in that respect?
Yeah, it's funny. I started with this Oberheim keyboard that I bought from this weird musician in Los Angeles. We were in LA one time, Billy and I were, and I was looking for a new keyboard. I started with like a Roland Juno 6, I think, was the first keyboard that I had. And we were using that for a while, and it was a little bit limiting. And we were in LA, and I think we saw like an ad in like the Recycler, which is like just like used gear, sort of like paper in Los Angeles. And this guy, his name was Duane Hitchings, I think. He wrote, we looked him up and we found out, or he told us like, but he was selling a keyboard. And we went to his place, to his studio, and bought this big Oberheim OB-6 from him. He had written the theme for Flashdance.
Oh, yeah.
That was sort of his crowning glory. But we bought this keyboard from him, and it was really big. We didn't have a case, and we brought it up to San Francisco, and we used that for a lot of years. And we would always just wrap it in a blanket and bring it to our gigs. And I never had a keyboard stand, so I'd usually play like on an ironing board or a table that I would find at the club. And so we had that for a long time. Then at some point, it sort of turned into like when sampling became a thing, that sort of looked like a cool, viable, sort of like new frontier way to go. And I bought, the first emulator, sort of like more pedestrian keyboards were these things called Emaxes. Do you guys remember those? Did you ever know those
absolutely.
keyboards?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one of those, and then I had two of those. And they ran with, generated by floppy disks. and we used those on the road for a couple of years. I guess like most of the career of Faith No More, probably like the last sort of like, I don't know, maybe 10 years of Faith No More, we used those. We had one of those Emaxes, then we had two of those Emaxes. And those were my sort of go-to. Then we broke up, and when we got back together, I sort of switched to using that program. What's it called again? Mainstage?
Oh, yep.
In the Logic software.
Yep.
Now, I've used that on all of the past sort of like Faith No More tours we've done. That's sort of been my go-to. But a while ago, like Faith No More, we had an anniversary for the very first record that we put out. It was called We Care a Lot. And we were re-releasing the record on Billy's label. And Chuck, our first singer, agreed to do some performances with us as we re-released that record. So those Dave Smith people, you know, those people that make keyboards in the Bay Area, they were putting out a version of the Oberheim, and it's called an OB-6, I think is what it's called. Right. Is it OB-6?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
And they had just put it out, so I went and checked it out. We were in San Francisco, and I went and checked it out at their place, and they were super nice and sort of hooked me up and gave me a good deal on one of those keyboards. And it has all the sounds that were on the old keyboard that I used for the first We Care a Lot record. So I got that keyboard and I limited myself. I'm a big fan of like parameters in that regard. And so I got that keyboard and we did those shows with Chuck that celebrated the very first Faith No More record. And they were, you know, pretty much the sounds that we used in the making of that record. So it kind of like worked out great. And since then, I love that keyboard. That's the one I use in any other band that I played in since then. Like I'm in a couple other bands, but all those bands I used that keyboard for.
Oh, I was just going to ask Roddy, at the Hellfest concert, what you had a keyboard there. It was all draped in white to match the dressing for the stage. What was that one that you were using there?
That was just like I was using Mainstage on a laptop that was like to my side, and that was just a MIDI controller. I can't remember what it was. It's a weighted MIDI controller. I can't remember who made it. Well, like it was just white because we like decorated all our stuff white. That was sort of the look of that tour.
The set dressing was amazing. It looked fantastic.
Thank you.
I was going to ask. You mentioned We Care a Lot, and you know, obviously the recent reuniting with Chuck Mosley. That the actual song We Care a Lot. I read in an interview somewhere that I believe you did that. Your inspiration for that song was, you were a lot of the inspiration for that song because of your love for hip-hop and that sort of thing. Are you able to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, at the time that we wrote that song, I think we hadn't made a record. We were just still sort of writing stuff. And we lived in San Francisco, and I think the first Run DMC record came out. And at the time, too, like Afrika, Bambaataa, and the Soulsonic Force, those records came out. There was a big song that came out that was everywhere. It's called Planet Rock. That was like the first sort of fusion of like Afrika, Bambaataa, and Soulsonic Force. They like sampled Kraftwerk. And that was huge for us. That was like, oh my God. And the sound of that, Billy and I heard it, I think, and Mike Borden, the drummer, we heard it like on the boardwalk in Venice or something. And we're like, what is that? It was Planet Rock by Soulsonic Force. And it was just this new sound that we'd never heard before. And it was like this crazy, like electronic infused rap that was like, it kind of blew our minds. So we started kind of like going down that path. And then shortly after that, the first Run DMC record came out. And that was sort of a new frontier also in a way, like they were using like electric guitars and they had sort of this toughness that was like, we really kind of related to too. So we were like, I don't know, we were just listening to a lot of stuff like that at the time. I mean, kind of all over the map, but that was one thing that we were listening. And I was really into like rap at that point. And most of the Faith No More stuff that we would do, we would usually start with bass and drums, and we would create what we called loops, we used to call them. We would just do a loop, and we would repeat these loops. We were really repetitive. And our first performances were just like, we would play like a 4-bar, 8-bar measure, like over and over and over and over again. And we just thought it was super heavy and intense, and we loved that vibe. So it kind of lent itself to sort of like a rap sort of vibe. It was just repetitive and sort of like a heavy drum thing, and we had this song, the music, and then we put sort of chords to it, and it kind of became We Care a Lot. And so, yeah, I wrote the words for We Care a Lot at my mom's house. It's funny, my sister just sent me today. Since I went to Los Angeles and I took care of my mom passed away during the whole COVID thing. It was a really intense time, but my sisters are now like moving everything out of the house that we grew up in, and they just sent me a picture just like today. It's a picture of like the lyrics for We Care a Lot. I had written them at my parents' house. I remember it. And they're exactly as they were. They're all on a piece of paper, like handwritten. I was like, oh, yeah, look at that. But that was sort of the motivation for that was for sure. Like we were fully inspired by Run DMC. It was like, we were going to.
Right.
And I don't even think like Chili Peppers weren't really even a thing at that point. I think Chili Peppers started happening right around that time too. And I just bring them up too because they were sort of a similar band that was like in a similar scene that were sort of using or appropriating like rap music or more soulful sort of like sounds like that. But it was really early stages of sort of like a lot of melding of different musical genres. And it was kind of what we started out doing, like trying different things and combining different like the rap and the like hard rock and heavy beats. And we just sort of went from there.
Must have been an exciting scene and an exciting time for you guys.
Yeah, in San Francisco, it was really exciting. It was really, really fun. It was like super cheap to live up there. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever been to San Francisco. It's like become this sort of like, software driven sort of new computer money town. And it's so expensive. Like as a kid, if you were to move there today, there's no way you could make it work. You could live like in an outlying area, maybe. But when we were there, it was like super affordable. Like Billy and I lived in an apartment. It was a beautiful Victorian apartment in the Mission District of San Francisco, which is kind of like the best neighborhood, like such a great neighborhood. And it was like each of us paid like $160 a month to live there. It was so cheap. And we would just eat burritos, and burritos were super cheap. And the music scene was really just like insane, just like really driven by artists. And really like boundary pushing people. It was a super exciting time. I'm super privileged to have been in San Francisco in the 80s. It was just a remarkable time.
Just talking from a performance perspective for a moment, when we watch Faith No More video clips and live performances, we see you as the keys player up the front of the band, lots of physical energy in your performances, which is absolutely appropriate for the way the music is. But I would have thought that's perhaps atypical for a lot of keys players. We often find ourselves hidden at the back of the stage behind a wall of gear. And I'm just wondering, Roddy, from your perspective, is that a liberating thing to be out front, or a scary thing, or is it something that you haven't thought much about? It's just what you do.
You know what? I started out playing keyboards in that realm, and it was like I was saying before, like at the time we started doing that band, like there weren't keyboards in bands like that. And keyboards, as we know, are a little bit dorky looking on stage. It's kind of like it's not a cool look. Like I'm not even talking guitar. I mean, that's really bad. But like a keyboard is just not as cool as a bass or a guitar or drums. It just looks. It's static, it doesn't move. And it's just sort of like, it's just not very cool. So from the get-go, for me, it was sort of a real challenge to sort of just like, I'm just going to fucking commit and make this work and be badass on the keyboard. So I just like, like sort of, I don't know, I was like a showy kid too, but we were, and the type of music too, sort of like we would play these hypnotic, trancey sort of loopy things, and we would get really into it. So we were all just like pretty much headbanging and moving around a lot. And it was sort of the energy of like that music scene, and what we were coming from was sort of that anyway. So there was not a chance I was going to get on stage with this, kind of static, uncool looking instrument and be uncool. So it was kind of a challenge, but I was just like, all right, we're just going to rock and make this work. And sort of that's what it kind of became, I guess.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think it's totally appropriate for the style of the music and your role in it. But it's nice to see a keyboard player up front rocking it out. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks.
I've just got now I'm going to go in a really strange direction here, Roddy. This is a very self-indulgent question. As David mentioned, I'm from Adelaide, and Adelaide is a small city which I know you've been to, touring with Faith No More. And I also know you guys had dinner at a restaurant called Afrika, which is a South African restaurant, and they have all sorts of indigenous South African food there. And I believe you guys were given the opportunity to eat the whole cow's head, and I want to know if you did eat it, and can you recommend it?
You know what? I can't recall. I kind of think so. Like, I'm not that adventurous. Like, I'll really honestly try anything, but like the singer of it, Mike, is super into like pushing the boundaries and trying weird things. So like Cowhead sounds familiar. I feel like we went there, but I can't really attest to the taste of it. I don't remember, which kind of says something in and of itself. Like I don't recall the taste of the Cowhead. So in that regard, I can't really recommend it.
It wasn't amazing and it wasn't horrible by the sound of that.
That's good.
Yeah, I have no recollection of the taste of the Cowhead.
That's right.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for answering that. David may have to edit that question out of the podcast later, but I had to ask.
No, I think that's great.
Yeah.
And Roddy, let's move on.
But what is it? What part of the cow head is it? It's like the inside of the cow's head, like the cow's brains or something.
I assume it's the cheeks and the brain, but
the cheeks, of course. Yeah, the jowls. That makes sense. It's sounding more and more familiar.
I tell you what, if that wasn't enough to make you vegetarian, I don't know what would. So, Roddy, just moving on to Imperial Teen, which is obviously a very, very different project, and you guys released a new studio album this year, Now We Are Timeless. Just going back to the formation of Imperial Teen, what led to that? Can you describe how you do the songwriting and collaboration with your bandmates in contrast to when you first started?
Yeah, Imperial Teen came about Faith No More had been together for probably 12 years. And I don't know, everyone reaches a point in their life of juncture. And I had sort of reached a point where just a lot of things had happened in my life. And my father had passed away and it was a really intense time. And I just felt like I wasn't doing what I wanted to do with music. And we were still doing Faith No More, and it was sort of a machine at that point. And we were touring and making records, and it was great, but we've been doing it for a long time. And I just sort of we were all kind of growing apart in the band a little bit, it felt like. We're still close, but over the course of years, it was just it kind of became an intense job, and I didn't feel also like I was giving it my all. There was a record in which I kind of just didn't even feel a part of, and I just didn't really want to do this heavy thing. It felt like something that I had done as a kid, and it didn't feel that appropriate or that sort of relevant to me anymore. And I was listening to a lot more sort of indie rock kind of stuff, and I met Will, the other guy who's in Imperial Teen with me. It's 2 women and 2 men. I had met him in Los Angeles, and we were just kind of playing music. And 2 of my best friends in San Francisco were Joan and Lynn, 2 really good friends who were in there's kind of my best friends. And we all just started writing music together, just kind of on a whim. And we said, let's just form a band. So we kind of set up a schedule for ourselves. We said, all right, let's form a band. Let's play a show in 3 weeks, and let's make a record. Let's just make ourselves do it. So we kind of just set about we just our sort of credo was just to I kind of wanted to play something I hadn't played before, and I didn't know how to play guitar, but I kind of wanted to play guitar. So I kind of learned the guitar, and I kind of learned drums a little bit, and we just started kind of playing together. And our whole kind of motto was we felt like it was a really neat sound to sort of hear people playing instruments that they hadn't ever played before, like children experimenting on new instruments. And that was sort of our theme. So we just Lynn, the drummer, who was an awesome drummer. She was in a band called The Dicks, and Sister Double Happiness. She was playing bass. Joan had never played bass before, guitar before. So she started playing guitar, and we just all kind of switched instruments a lot and just kept it kind of challenging and fresh for ourselves. And we wrote a bunch of songs really fast. We played a show, and then we made a record. And it came out super well. It was our first record. It was called Seasick. I think it was like 1996 maybe. And it just made me feel good, which is where I needed to go at the time. And so we were still doing Faith No More at the time, and it was kind of like a juggling thing for a while. We went back and forth, and we would make records. Faith No More was making records, and I was kind of touring both bands. So it was kind of a little bit of a schizophrenic sort of like plateau, but the Imperial Teen was kind of like keeping me happy. I was playing with people who were my best friends, and it just felt a little bit more real for me. And we were coming a little bit from a place of the heart more than sort of Faith No More, who had just become sort of big at the time, and I felt disconnected from. And it just kind of gave me a new perspective and sort of helped me through a weird time in my life. And as a testament to like the Imperial Teen, we're still all best friends. I was just talking to them all before we started talking tonight. And we've still we make records. We make records like probably every 5 years or something. And we don't sell a lot of records, but we love what we do, and I love the records that we make, and we keep doing it. I love it.
And I can't emphasize enough to our listeners that may know Roddy mostly from Faith No More. It's nearly a polar opposite, and there's some beautiful keyboard sounds on some of those songs, on each of the albums. It's just it's a real pleasure to listen to, let alone all the other.
Thank you.
And speaking of beautiful to listen to, I know you've scored a few films too, Roddy. How did that first come up as an opportunity for you?
I think it came up like late 90s. I was sort of at that time, and like Faith No More was sort of winding down. It's something that I had always dreamed about, sort of like doing score stuff. And I had gone to film school. That's what I went to school for when I moved up to San Francisco when I was a kid. So I've always sort of been into film stuff. And I think at some point, ASCAP, that songwriting.
Yeah.
ASCAP, do you know what that is? ASCAP BMI. I was a member of ASCAP, and I just sort of started poking around and looking at what ASCAP offered in terms of and they had this film scoring workshop that they offered, and you had to sort of audition to get into it. But it was really intense, and they took 20 people in, and over the course of 2 weeks, you do this sort of crash course of meet a lot of people in the music industry who do film score stuff. And at the end of the 2 weeks, you write a piece to a clip, and you write it for like a 42-piece orchestra, and you score it out, and then you go to a soundstage, and this orchestra performs your piece, and you record it, and you do it to the clip of a movie. And I sort of did that. It took place in Los Angeles. I did it, and I really loved it. And I just kind of had this aspiration of Faith No More was kind of winding down, and we kind of knew, or I guess we'd been broken up at that time. So it wasn't imperative that I stayed in San Francisco anymore. And Los Angeles is really the hub of kind of entertainment and filmmaking stuff. And it's where I grew up. So I kind of just had this plan to go back to Los Angeles and sort of start a career with that. So I took that course, and then I just started sort of trying to get work doing that. And I did. It was a good time. I liked it, and I didn't like it. I loved it, and I hated it. And I made money, and I made no money. And I still love doing it, but I honestly don't do it that much. It's just it kind of became a weird thing too. I did it for a while and had some really good experiences. Some films I really loved. And then I even did some television stuff that I really love the television aspect of it. Because with the TV, I don't know if you guys have ever done that sort of stuff. With the TV series, started doing kids stuff at one point. And with the kids stuff or TV stuff, it happens on a weekly basis. And the turnaround is so fast. And it's super liberating to not put a whole lot of thought process into what you're doing. You have to work so fast that really all you can do is just play whatever. Just make it work really fast. Because you'll do an episode, and then the next week you have another episode that's due, and the week after that an episode, and it's just so fast. It's this conveyor belt in which you just really have to be on your toes, And that was super fun. I really liked doing that. It was exhausting, but I really liked that for a while. It was
And
fun.
with late teenagers now, Roddy, I grew up with Fred for many years, so I'm aware of your
Oh
work on that.
shit, you know Fred.
Yes.
Yeah. Fred was so awesome. He was like some guy, this guy Clay, who directed that movie. Somehow we just hit it off. And that was a dream come true. Like you would look at what I've done in the score world and kind of pick that out as like something that might be embarrassing or something I didn't like. But it was a dream. I loved it so much. It was kind of like Fred, for you guys who are listening, is a sort of like I don't know, how would you even describe him? He's like this kid who started a sort of a show on YouTube in which he sped up his voice. And he's like a kid. And he's just sort of like, he can't get the girl. He's just like a real showboat of a kid. And he was really popular on YouTube. And Nickelodeon kind of picked him up. And my friend Clay made this movie with him it's called Fred the Movie. And it's this kid. It's kind of like Pee Wee Herman, but a little low grade Pee Wee Herman. But the music was super fun. It was really like cartoon-esque and fast moving and lighthearted and was really, really a good experience. So we made that movie. And then Nickelodeon aired it. And I think it was like the most watched Nickelodeon movie that ever happened. Like kids love that.
7 million tune in for it initially, from what I was reading, and I love that you said, Roddy, that some people would be embarrassed and that you're not, because obviously nor should you be embarrassed because it's great. But I would actually have as a badge of honor in doing the research, that movie from a movie viewpoint, not a music viewpoint, has a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I would have that front and center on my website. I think that's absolutely brilliant, because it shows you how people don't
zero
get it.
mean people? People don't like it. Is that what zero means?
Well, I assume that means critics don't like it. I know it was loved by people, so I think that's great. Like, I would be proud of that.
I loved it. I stand behind it 100%. And that kid is so cool.
Yeah.
And he was such an entrepreneur too. He was like genius kid. And from that, then they made like Night of the Living Fred and Camp Fred. There were sequels that were equally successful. And after that, we even did like a Fred the Show. And I scored all of that. And it was like, those were the glory days. I loved it so much.
That is brilliant.
So, Roddy, if you look at Faith No More, Imperial Teen, and a couple of other projects and bands you've been involved in. So there's Nastie Band, which is a real doomy metal vibe, and Crickets, which is a real electronica dance vibe. Really diverse musical palette. It must be great to be able to explore those things. And I'm curious, are there any other musical ideas you're yet to explore that you might be working towards in the future?
Good question. I don't know. Like when you bring that up, it's like, oh yeah. Those are, they're all really different flavors. Like the Nastie Band is more a theatrical thing. Like it's a crazy, scary thing on stage. We have like two identical twins. We have like a really heavy rock drummer, a heavy guitar player. We have a guy on stage who paints himself usually one color, and he's just like screaming his brains out on stage into a microphone that's never turned on. And then we have like kind of an 84-year-old singer. And we're all sort of covered in mud and do this like really heavy, crazy, hypnotic music. It's a real crazy theatrical sound and weirdness.
So it's very performance oriented by the sound.
Super performance, super arty and crazy and scary. And then Crickets, the other side of that is Crickets is more like ESG, sort of like Tom Tom Club, like really like simple. And that was an exercise sort of like coming out of a lot of like having done a lot of recording and sort of like, I don't know if you guys get this, but when I get into a studio, it's really typical to sort of like overdub. And just keep, as a keyboard player, it's so easy to add things and add things and add things that it enhance the sound. And generally I find work really well, but Crickets is a place I went with JD, my friend. She's in she used to be in that band La Tigra. She was in the band called Men, and Michael, who was also in Men with her. But we kind of like developed this sort of like formula in which we like kind of took everything away from the music in a way. Like we wrote songs and then we did our best to like take things out of the mix. So the result is a like super sparse, like empty sound, but it really hits hard in that way in its simplicity. Those bands, I don't know, it almost seems like I kind of do one thing and then I need to do another, like doing Nastie Band, like we're just full on like noise collage and so full. And then I kind of had to sort of like try something else and strip down in the sort of like Cricket's realm. So it's sort of like, I don't know, situationally, I think I moved to a different project and tried a different sound because I need that in my sort of like musical heart or whatever.
Yep.
And also just like friends, like all of those people are New York, really dear friends of mine. And sort of that sort of dictates it also. But as far as like where I go, I'm not sure. Like a while ago, a couple of years ago, I did an opera. I wrote an opera. That's why I kind of moved to New York to write an opera. And I'm a big opera fan. And
this was the Sasquatch opera.
Yeah, the Sasquatch opera. I kind of did that a couple of years ago, which is a really intense and liberating, really fun experience. And that kind of came off of the, like, when I was doing a lot of film score. When you do film score, I don't know if you guys have you guys ever done that kind of work at all?
Only briefly, yeah.
It's fun, but you're like, at the end of the day, sort of like what kind of like was a letdown for me is it's like you're kind of sprinkling some musical sort of like statements over someone else's project, which is cool. And it works and it's fun and it can be a good sort of like exercise. But at the end of the day, I just kind of felt like I want to do the project. I want to be the person that, you know, if it's not a film, it's like I want to be able to call all the shots and make all the decisions. So I kind of, after doing all that film score stuff for like a while, I was like, I just kind of felt like I owed it more. I owed myself more than that. So I moved to New York to do Sasquatch specifically. I was like, you know what? I'm going to move to New York. It just felt like the place to go to write an opera. So I came here and I said, I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to write an opera. So I set out to do specifically that. That was sort of another like kind of reactionary thing. But the point I'm getting to is I did that and it felt really, really good. It was really hard to pull off and it lost a lot of money and it's really hard for opera to make money.
Yeah.
And it was like, at the same time, it was like one of my proudest achievements. So I kind of like, I'm at a point right now where with COVID, it's like we have all this time on our hands. I'm sort of like, I need to do another opera. So I'm kind of think I'll go there again. I mean, your question is, I'm trying anything new, like, not really. I think I want to try another opera is where I'm kind of going.
And just if you want to lose a bit more money, Roddy, maybe it's time for a jazz record.
I'm not there yet. You know, I'm not really like a jazz guy. Are you guys really into jazz?
No. I mean, I appreciate it for what it is, but no.
I kind of do a little bit more and more, but I've always said like, no, I'm going to save that for when I'm older.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite there yet. I don't do jazz, but I do opera in a big way.
Yeah, that's cool. I like listening to jazz, but I'm not a good enough player to actually play jazz.
Same.
So,
that's the thing too. It takes a real sense of intuition to like pull that off. Like you hear stuff, like listen to Mingus or whatever, and it's like, God, that person just feels that shit. You know? Absolutely. I don't know if I don't. Yeah, I'm in the same way. I don't think I'm like that good of a player. I don't think I could pull that off.
This probably brings us to a good point to talk about something you mentioned right at the outset of our chat, which was your project with your boyfriend Joey, Man on Man, and right. You talked about your trip and the sort of the COVID-inspired situation that got you to that project, and you released the first song, Daddy, in May. And as far as I understand it, you haven't released any of the other tracks yet. So I'm interested to understand what we can expect to hear from Man on Man in the future. What have you got for us?
Yeah, we started the project. I mean, it's kind of been a while now because it was specifically a project done in quarantine. That was how we started doing what we did. So that was sort of the theme of where we were. And we felt like it was a really liberating experience for ourselves. and a really nice thing to share with people who are also in quarantine. So we had like everything that we did in that crazy house that I talked about earlier, and we just like recorded everything in this little house. We made that video. We made the video. We made 2 videos, and made them by ourselves with the help of one person at one point, but basically by ourselves in that same house, and just sort of like kind of just started sort of building something slowly. But we started off with a sort of idea of maybe doing like maybe 4 or 5 songs, but we ended up recording 12 songs. So now we have a full record, and now we're kind of at a point like deciding what to do with it. We kind of did at the time, we decided, well, let's just put out singles and we'll make videos and just do this, and this will be an exercise. And we did the first single and the first video, and we got a huge response for it, I think, because it's basically like us jumping around in our underwear, and it sort of in a weird way like spoke to like a gay community that hadn't really been represented so well. And we got super sweet feedback, and really like developed a really nice sort of a collection of people who like kind of identified with what we were doing, and it was like, whoa, okay, we've got something here. So we made another video to a second song that we did, and then kind of the uprising happened here in America over George Floyd and sort of like the racial inequality that kind of like came into our lives like super suddenly. And I don't know how that affected you guys in Australia, but in America, it was sort of like everything stopped. We were in the middle of COVID. I mean, for me, it was so intense too, because my mom was dying at the same time, but we like, everything just stopped. And at the time too, like Crickets was supposed to put out a record right then, like our record was coming out. And so Joey and I thought we'll wait and we'll let Crickets have its moment and put out the record, and then we'll put out our second single, the Man on Man single. But the uprising happened, and it was like, it just felt super disrespectful to sort of like indulge in anything other than the politics of the situation that was going on. So we kind of like, it just wasn't an appropriate time to release any music. So even the Crickets record was supposed to come out, and we just kept postponing it, saying it's just not time. We just didn't want to take away from the cause of what was going on in the world with the struggle that was happening in the uprising that was super important. So we just kind of like kept silent for a while. Then we finally ended up we put out the Crickets record finally. I think it came out like a little over a month ago. And we let that happen for a couple weeks. And then we next, I guess a week from tomorrow, we're going to put out the second Man on Man single and video. Comes out in a week. It's kind of a drag. It's been so long, and it was such a quarantine-specific project. We wanted it to come out like in that time frame, but it's sort of been a while. But it just is what it is. We were just respecting the uprising and the movement of that. We're just sort of giving that space. But yeah, super long answer.
Yeah, no,
I apologize, but like next Monday we're going to release our second single. It's called "Baby, You're My Everything." It's kind of a love song that we did together, and at that point, we're going to kind of figure out how to put out a record. We have a full record, 11 songs. We just got it finished mixing it today, actually, and we're just kind of trying to figure out where to put out a record, what putting out a record in today's like sort of like this new world, like how it even works, and we're trying to figure that out, how to do it. But I'm super crazy about it. It's like really crazy mix of songs. It's super nice. It's just me and Joey and a friend of his named Joey, a second Joey, who plays in that band Paramore and plays with Haley, who's in that band Paramore. He did a couple tracks with us, but mostly it's just me and Joey doing kind of love songs, singing about ourselves, singing about like isolation, singing about our relationship. It sounds indulgent. It's not. It's not that indulgent. It's just a little bit indulgent, but it speaks to people, and it feels really, really good. I'm really excited about it.
Can't wait to hear it.
Well, as you said, the first single got some really positive feedback. Just looking at the general commentary on it. So it's as you said, it's obviously connecting with people, which is great.
Yeah, that felt really good. Like we got like really nice messages from people just across the board saying thank you so much. I mean, it's just like, I don't know if you guys, you're not queer probably, but like maybe I don't know, whatever, but like the queer sort of community and the presentation of like what gay looks like in the mass media is like kind of a squeaky clean sort of pretty boy sort of vibe, you know? And we're clearly not that. Like we're both like kind of like, I'm older, you know, we're big guys, big hairy guys, and it's a different look. So it is a representation of queer culture in a different way that I think hasn't really been explored. And we got super great feedback from people just like saying, thank you so much for, you know, putting this out there. It means so much. I feel represented in a way that I hadn't, and it feels good in that way too. It feels like political in a way that kind of surprised us.
That's excellent.
Yeah, I think maybe it just feels very authentic, and I think that might be what's resonating with people.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
And to go from an authentic, positive experience to the absolute opposite, which is our standard question of the most memorable train wreck you've ever had as a keyboard player, Roddy. So it can be in the studio, it can be on stage, whatever it is. What's the biggest glitch you've ever had?
You know, there's been a couple. I think it's always with keyboards, it's hard because you don't know where, it's hard to isolate where the problem is. You know, just like from a tech standpoint, we had like, I think one of the worst shows we ever played, we had gotten to Japan and we sort of rented a keyboard there and something was happening on stage. Like the stage was kind of like a little bit bouncy. So the keyboard itself was on like a keyboard stand and it was sort of bouncing up and down. And I mean, not heavily, but it was like vibrating a lot. And the MIDI, I was using MIDI at the time, and the MIDI just kept getting disconnected. And we couldn't figure out what that was. And it was because the vibrations, like the MIDI chord was not good, or it's, I think sort of the MIDI into the keyboard was off a little bit. So we could not get sound, and we couldn't figure out in the course of it what the issue was. And it was just like one of those like crazy, like isolated times when like we were just on stage and it's Japan and it's huge. I think it was our first show we played in Japan in a super long time when we were doing our reunion tour. And it was just like, I mean, there was no keyboards and there was nothing we could do. And it's sort of like, I mean, as well as the band is sort of like, you know, you're up there on stage and your gear isn't working. Like it's ultimately, you know, your fault. It's my fault. And everyone's looking at me and knowing like how, you know, like it's just the keyboards aren't working. It's just like, it just didn't get worse.
No, good story.
The next question really is what's on the horizon for the coming year, if it's possible to define that in the current situation.
Yeah, we kind of, the touring the Faith No More was supposed to do last summer. A lot of it has just been rescheduled. So we're going to come to Australia in next summer is the plan. If everything goes well and the sort of like COVID situation works itself out, we will come to Australia and do the tour that we were supposed to do last summer. And then we'll do Europe also in the same way. That's happening then. In between now and then, I'm not really sure. I've been doing this like crazy song share a day on my Bandcamp account, which has been like every day I create a piece of music and I share it. And I just reached a point today where I was like, I think it was number 24. And I was like, done. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. So I feel like I kind of need a break just for a sec. But then again, like Man on Manic comes out next week. And that doesn't really entail anything other than just like putting the video and the song out there. But I think we'll probably try and figure out how to do that live and create a show that hopefully we'll be able to share with the world. It's such a weird time because like, what do people do? If you're not like writing, like what do you do? Like performers, a lot of my friends here in New York are like all performers, and performances isn't really a thing right now. Like you can't perform. So it's a good question. Like, what do we do? What is the next year?
Yeah. No, really
Are
valid point.
you guys are both in bands. Are you guys bands playing at all?
No, same, Roddy.
Not really.
No.
No, not really. It's tough.
It's hard. I mean, that was sort of what my premise was starting like the sort of like daily thing was at least like if we're going to be stuck inside, it's still the same thing like Man on Man was that too. But it's like if we're going to be stuck inside and we can't go out and we have to isolate, like let's at least write and be creative and keep that going. So maybe I will. Maybe I'll try the opera. Maybe I'll start writing the opera.
I feel it calling you. And speaking of being isolated, let's talk about Desert Island Discs, Roddy. So 5 albums you couldn't live without.
All right, hold on. I'm going to look it up. I wrote it down in my notes. Okay. The first one, my first Desert Island record is the very first Roxy Music record. Are you guys Roxy Music fans?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I love that record. That was one of the first sort of records that I heard when I was a kid that was sort of like, I don't know, I'd heard David Bowie before, but like Roxy Music was like unapologetically kind of flamboyant and chic and sort of combined like weird like fashion elements to what they were doing, and it was really sophisticated to me, and I've never gone away from that record. I love it so much.
Great.
And let's see. The second one, oddly enough, is a record that I don't really know so well, but every time I go to it, it kind of puzzles me, and I think there's something to be said for that. But it's the soundtrack to The Wiz. Have you guys ever listened to that at all?
Yeah. I haven't. I don't know. I've listened to the soundtrack, but I've seen the movie, obviously.
Yeah, it's so weird, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a nut I've yet to crack, and I figure that would be fun to have on the island. Also on the island, I'm going to have Prince's record 1999. Just really makes me feel good, and it's some good, like, sort of like dancing. So I could sort of get exercise and dance and feel like a rhythm thing on the island. That feels really good. So I'm going to bring that record too. Also for some atmosphere, I was always a real big fan of Throbbing Gristle. I don't know if you guys know that. I love Throbbing Gristle so much. 20 Jazz Funk Greats was like a record that really like spoke to me when I was a kid. When I had first moved to San Francisco, it was like this weird art damaged, crazy place that kind of still I go back to a lot, and it's really a relevant record to me. And then the final one is David Bowie's Hunky Dory. I really love the songs on the record. The songwriting is so strong and so emotional.
Great picks. Great picks, Roddy, and I think it shows your own diverse approach to your own music. And look, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and we look forward to seeing you down here, but many, many decades more of great music from you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. You guys are really sweet to talk to me.
And there we go. I think, Paul, you and I have talked off mic a few times about how genuinely brilliant some of these guys and girls are talking to us, and Roddy's no exception, just a genuine, interesting guy who loves what he does.
Yeah, really passionate and really humble, and the comments he made to us after we went off air, just thanking us for reaching out to him, just shows you he's just someone who loves to share his music and has a genuine passion for what he does, and we love talking to those people, don't we? Yeah,
absolutely. And I mentioned before the show that you had a particular interest because you're a bit of a very large Faith No More fan. I mean, I've loved what they've done. I've even played some of this stuff in bands, but you're another whole level.
Yeah, they're just a brilliant band, and for anyone who might be a more casual listener to Faith No More, if you really dig into some of those songs, you can really hear not only how great the songs are put together, but Roddy's contribution as well. And he talks a lot about that in the interview, obviously. Yeah, and I can't recommend Imperial Teen highly enough, and Crickets. I just love all that, electronic-driven music, and they really know how to put a great song together. Mm. So there we have it. As always, we'll be back in around a fortnight, and look forward to speaking with you then. In the meantime, our website is www.keyboardchronicles.com. We're on Facebook at facebook.com Keyboard Chronicles, and on Twitter at the Keyboard CHR1.
As always, we have our good old-fashioned email, which is editor@keyboardchronicles.com. And if you'd like to become an official supporter and help us keep going from strength to strength, we do have a Patreon account, which is at www.patreon.com/keyboardchronicles. A huge thanks, Paul. A huge thank you to Paul again for joining me this episode.
Yeah, thanks, David. I had a great time as always. I really appreciate being invited.
It's always a pleasure. And most importantly, thanks to you for listening, and hope to see you back here next episode.